The 2018 midterm elections has voters determining 6 different state constitutional amendments. Photo ID, a cap on corporate and personal income tax rates, and protections for hunting and fishing are on the ballot, as is an amendment that could create a bipartisan elections and ethics boards. So with our state constitution being part of the campaign season, we must turn to UNC-Chapel Hill Law School Dean Martin Brinkley, an expert on North Carolina's constitution. Sir, thank you so much for kicking off this program with a nice civics lesson, because I think a lot of voters need one. I know I do. A lot of folks don't understand, why do we have a state constitution when the federal one is out there and you hear about it so much more than our state's constitution?
Well, if you remember, most Americans are citizens of 2 different states at the same time. One is the United States itself, and the other is one of the 50 states. Each one of those governments has to have a structure, and that's basically what a constitution does. It sets up a structure for government. It assigns power to that government, and it tells that government the areas of power that it cannot exercise. And so we need one of those for our state government as well as for the federal government. Now, the federal constitution is supreme over the state constitution and over any laws that are passed by the North Carolina General Assembly under the state constitution. There's a specific article of the U.S. Constitution, Article 6, that is the supremacy clause. And so we are always subordinate to that. But we have a state government in North Carolina, and it needs a structure, and that's what our state constitution does.
It sounds like the state constitution is more mechanical in nature, as opposed, we study the Bill of Rights in school, and we know about the state constitution. Is that accurate?
It's a mixture, I would say. We have a Declaration of Rights that is a bit of an analog to the Bill of Rights in the federal Constitution. Interestingly enough, our Declaration of Rights is Article 1 of the North Carolina Constitution. The Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments to the federal Constitution. So the Bill of Rights comes after the body of the document on the federal side. On the state side, the Declaration of Rights is the first thing that you read. But to your point about it being more mechanical, I would say it is true that the state constitution has a great deal more detail about subjects that the federal constitution never touches. For example, there are extensive provisions of the state constitution dealing with state finance there's nothing like that in the federal constitution.
Why, or what is the difficulty for, let's say, ordinary people to grasp the concepts within the state constitution? There seems to be, polls suggest, a knowledge gap. People don't understand exactly what some of these amendments. We're talking about creating an elections and ethics enforcement board. Is it something that voters should really worry about? What will it do if they vote no or yes? Does it matter?
It does matter. The state constitution is, in its way, closer to the voter and to the citizen than the federal constitution is. But it doesn't get the attention that the federal document does. There's far more action in courts about the federal constitution than there is, and frankly, the media cover that kind of action more than we do the state constitution. So it sort of flies underneath the radar, I think, for most people. But if you think about it, just think of it as the North Carolina version of the federal document for our state to be able to function.
When it comes to this Ethics and Elections Board, I don't want to get too far in the weeds in this because some of it is political, but it does change the mechanics of government. How do you see that working together? Voters pass this amendment that's on the ballot. It will create an 8-member board that is completely bipartisan. It would be nonpartisan, but bipartisan, equal weight. And it would handle elections and ethics matters, I guess, in one clearinghouse. Is that fundamentally different than what we had before?
Well, I would say the idea of an ethics and elections board is a relatively recent idea in North Carolina government anyway. There were boards of elections going back into the 19th century. I'm fairly confident that the idea of an ethics board is a relatively new feature of state government. States are places that act as laboratories of political ideas, as Justice Louis Brandeis famously said. The federal government often allows the states to work out particular approaches to public policy issues, and I think this is just another of those experiments.
If you're an attorney going before the old elections board or the old ethics board at this point, would you see or expect to handle business differently if you had a client going before either the board separately or as one combined? Does it change the legal approach?
I just don't have enough background in this kind of practice, honestly, to be able to say how would it change my approach.
It just depends on what the expertise of the attorney in question.
I think any good lawyer appearing in front of a board or a court would do his or her research about how best to represent the client in front of that decision maker.
It's the legislature that puts this before the voter. In your opinion, is it important that everyone cast a ballot for some of these obscure amendments? Because sometimes people won't know what to think, and rather than vote in a way contrary to their interests, they won't vote at all. What would you recommend to someone? Because you are of stature in this state. Should we cast a ballot whether we understand all these amendments or not, or should we just lay low?
Well, I think before you get to the question of whether you should cast a ballot without understanding the amendments, you ought to make it your business to go out and understand them. And that's why I'm delighted to be here and so happy that the Bar Association is doing these programs. It's the duty of all of us to make ourselves educated citizens of this republic if it is going to work going forward.
How easy is it to change the state constitution? They just put an amendment up and voters vote on it, and 50% changes our constitution. Tell me about that threshold historically.
So it's a little more than that. There are basically two ways to change the state constitution. One way is for the General Assembly to call a constitutional convention. That's a separate body of individuals drawn from around the state, elected by the people of the state. We haven't had one of those in North Carolina since 1875. We had a few of them in the 19th century, but since then we have used a shorter form procedure in which the legislature, by a 3/5 vote of both houses, puts a measure in front of the people to amend the state constitution. We've had, I think I'm right on this, there were 97 amendments proposed under the 1868 Constitution, and I believe something like 69 of those were passed. The rest were rejected. There were about 20 amendments proposed to the 1971 Constitution over time before the current ones that will be on the ballot this November. So amendments are not uncommon.
Well, Dean, I think you've made the point clear. If you're watching this show, you'll be better educated about the pros, the opponents and the proponents of this issue. I thank you for your time to offer a civics lesson, as it is a very, very important matter.
Amendments Explained is a production of UNC-TV in association with the North Carolina Bar Association and the North Carolina Bar Association Foundation.